Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Robinson. I'm a master sommelier and proud Napa Valley resident for 15 years, a little more than that, coming to you live from Napa Valley for a wonderful evening of conversation in celebration of the introduction of the LCBO's Vintages offering of super premium luxury Napa Valley wines, which we'll talk all about how you can access that a little bit later. But we're so thrilled. We've got three extraordinary vintner panelists to join in conversation about what makes our beautiful and extraordinary region great and what makes the wines coming from this region great. I will introduce our vintners to you in a moment, and we will dive right in. But first, I would love to say that we want you to, if you haven't already, to pour a glass of majestic Napa Valley wine and enjoy it responsibly along with us. And with that, I think we're going to bring on the screen because I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. But I also want to say, I think that you guys just finished celebration of Thanksgiving, and ours is coming up soon. And so with all of us and the opportunity to get together and spend this evening with you, I want to just say a cheers and toast to everyone who's joined in this very special celebration of the Vintages offering. You're going to have an exclusive purchasing opportunity for those wines between now and tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But right now, let's get into introduction of our wonderful vintners. And I just want to say that this lineup and this gathering of good friends and neighbors of mine is also a really exciting and special microcosm of kind of the DNA of Napa Valley, because we have a fifth generation Napa Valley born and bred wine grower and winemaker. We have, of course, a farm girl turned social justice advocate turned diplomat turned art and culture icon of Napa Valley. And then we also have a media mogul who is really known for the fusion of culture with technology, such that we retain the authenticity of culture and we use the best of technology to allow us to do that. And I think that's really quite special. And when you talk about the throw that into the mixture of Napa Valley, you get a 150-year-old wine region with a beautiful future ahead of it and a wonderful place for us all to celebrate some of the world's greatest wines. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce, first of all, Catherine Hall. And like everybody on this panel, there's so much that I could say, but my personal relationship with Catherine goes back to 1997 when we were both four, just kidding. But back to 1997, she was had just been appointed the U.S. ambassador to Austria, and I competed in the World Championship of Sommeliers there in Vienna. And she hosted the candidates there for a dinner at the ambassador's residence, and that was my first meeting with her. But I do have to say that the podium that year was graced by Canada's candidate. I didn't make the podium. I was nowhere near as good, but Canada's sommelier made the podium, meaning the finalists. And one of my favorite ways to describe watching a great sommelier do their work is that they're usually 5 or 6 inches off the floor and they never come down. And that's exactly what Canada's sommelier candidate that year was like. And so it's a wonderful memory for me. But then now, many years later, Catherine and I are now actually neighbors in Napa Valley. And she has seen her dream to bring great wine and great wine culture, having grown up as the daughter of a grape grower and working in vineyards as a kid, with classical art and community advocacy and preservation. So you see the beautiful winery there. And I encourage you to pick up her book, The Perfect Score, while you can read the story of how her husband, Craig, pulled up to the dilapidated ruin of the 1885 stone winery, the Bergfeld winery there that you see. And decided that there was a vision for this winery and it needed to come back and be part of the fixture of what makes Napa Valley great. And so now you see this beautiful sunrise shot of their modern winemaking facility, as well as incredible hospitality area. And all around, when you get there, and I'm saying when, because you will see and experience art and great wine. So that's Catherine. There's so much more to say, but Next, I'm going to introduce you to Kashi Khalidi. Equally another personal connection for me. My husband John and I were both on the board of COPIA, the cultural center founded by Robert Mondavi and Julia Child in Napa. And so I know that Kashi is a second generation at the very least. I think there's a longer wine growing history in the family. Vintner, who has grown up in the great wines of the world in Napa Valley, but has created this extraordinary estate. And we've got it pinpointed for you here on the map. You see it's in the Oak Knoll district of Napa Valley, which is one of our southernmost AVAs for the Cabernet Sauvignon grape. And we're going to come back to that in a second. But this is an extraordinary winery facility. And it's just a place that you arrive at, and it is its own thing. It's this really special island oasis, obviously a paean to great design, and surrounded by certified organically farmed estate vineyards. So Kashi, welcome. And finally, I'm going to introduce Joe Wagner, or as I'm allowed to call him because I've known him for since we were both kids, Joey. And fifth generation wine grower, growing up with certainly Cabernet in the blood, and then ventured off into the Pinot Noir realm, and is now I guess I'd call it a Midas of finding great vineyards and bringing them together into what he would describe as a quilt of a Napa Valley Cabernet, where you take all the best of our diversity of soils and bring them together into a great wine. Our kids have been on the same soccer teams together, and I don't know how he has time to make wine with 6 of them, but Joey is a fixture of the community as well. So it's great to have you here, and let's get started. I want to make sure that everybody is able to just kind of kick back and relax. And I'm going to start out, Catherine. I know how you got in the wine business. You grew up in the wine business, but what does it mean to you to have come back to Napa Valley and to have done what you've done with the properties that you've done?
It's been a dream. This has been my dream to come back and do this, Andrea, as you know. I always knew I would come back and be in this business. I just never thought it would take me quite so long to do. I love the dirt. Really everything about it. It's not really ever a choice.
I agree with that. If you had to talk about what makes Napa Valley great, and I think in this case, we're new, but yet we have a history that's super special. Talk a little bit about the history piece of it, and kind of paint the picture for people and why it was important to you to restore this winery on your property.
Because it was important for me to sort of restore this property. I love showcasing the history that we have. When you talk to folks outside of the United States, I think we have a sort of skewed idea of what history is. To begin with, we always think it revolves around the United States, but on top of that, history is so long. And so our history doesn't go back so far, but I must say that as years go on, I see more and more of the things that my father used to do in the vineyard coming back. And there's a lot of things going on in vineyards today that we have very sophisticated tools. We use them as well. But at the same time, there is no substitute for just being in the vineyard, looking at the vines, feeling them. When you're going to decide when you're going to harvest, putting that grape in your mouth, feeling how the crunch of the seed. And so I think things have changed, and yet they are very much the same. Gravity flow, for heaven's sake, in a winery, and the gentleness that we use when we make the wine. That's very new in a sense, and also very old.
Right, where it all started.
Tradition is very important. It really did. Tradition is really important in our business. I mean, and when you go to a restaurant, for example, I think we all really enjoy having the waiter when we used to be able to enjoy going to restaurants, but that will come again, as you say. But we enjoy having the waiter pop the cork, and I mean, there's a tradition around the enjoyment of wine, and wine is so much more than what's in the glass. It's the experience that's associated with it.
I love that. Yes. And it's funny because I talked about the experience of meeting with you, and I'm sure that night we had incredible wines at that dinner, but all I remember is the experience of being there and all of those incredible, sommelier talents and brains and just being awed by it. And I think it's the way people feel when they come to Napa Valley, especially for the first time, and they see all of the names that they've heard of, and then they see the beauty of it. And there's this moment of being awestruck. And then yet here we are. This is home, pinch me every day, right?
Yeah,
Don't you do the
it's
same?
true. Yeah, I totally do. By the way, I have to say, you were a star at that experience in Vienna too, way back when. So don't.
Thank
I
you.
just want to correct the record in that sense. But yeah, I think there is so much about this valley that is so special for all of us who are lucky enough to live here, and I think we really appreciate it. It's wonderful. We you can talk about the terroir, and there's so many things that make you Napa Valley, and I hope we will talk about those things, but the terroir is so unique. But then there is nothing on top of that to compare it with the people. For those of us who are lucky enough to live here and work here, just it's the camaraderie, it's the way we come together when we need each other. That I think is what makes living and working in this valley so very special.
Truly, yeah, it's a really truly a community. Kashi, I want to ask you a question because Catherine was talking about the vineyards and the diversity, and with Ashes and Diamonds, you really focus a lot on special vineyards and kind of curating them and bringing out their characteristics. We're going to talk about your wine in a moment, but what drew you to that, and why?
Well, I'd love to answer your question, but a thought just occurred to me. Does it look like I have flowers growing out of my head here?
It sort of looks like a Carmen Miranda hat, but it
Is it?
becomes you. It's awesome.
Okay. All right. Well, apologies. I just noticed that right now. Uh, anyways, but to answer your question, you know, the way I was introduced to Napa wines was probably a little bit different than some of my peers here in the industry. My father would share these old school Napa Valley wines with me during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And of course, what you do in Thanksgiving and Christmas, you share older wines. And so my introduction to Napa wines were through his cellar. And I think if you've been to my dad's cellar, you can recognize how much of a celebration of Napa Valley heritage exists in his cellar. But I very early on appreciated those wines from the '70s era Mondavi and even the '60s era BV with Andrei Chelichev and of course Martha's Vineyard, so on and so forth. All the sort of old school Napa Valley greats. So um, when I started Ashes and Diamonds, I wanted to pay homage to the pioneers of Napa Valley, and if we decided to build something here in Napa Valley, we recognize that we'd be standing on the shoulders of the Napa Valley greats like the Mondavi family and what Chelichev contributed to winemaking, and Warren Winiarski, so on and so forth. So in doing that, we also wanted to celebrate all the various AVAs in Napa Valley and how it's it's still amazing, as I'm sure Catherine and Joey, you'll agree. Each AVA, each vineyard is so different from one another, and it's truly remarkable. And so Ashes and Diamonds continues to be a celebration of all of the pockets and all the patchwork quilt that makes up Napa Valley. So
Completely agree, and I think it's interesting because I'm glad you pointed out the diversity. Your winery is in the Oak Knoll district of Napa Valley AVA. So, as I mentioned, one of our most southerly AVAs. If you had to give take Oak Knoll, take Rutherford, take Oakville, and take your choice of a mountain AVA, those four, and just one or two words for each one that would highlight what's unique about them. I would just put you on the
okay.
spot with that one.
Yeah, no. When I think of Rutherford, I think of Rutherford Dust. I think of Georgia Third Vineyard, which we make wine from that vineyard. We call it Vineyard One because we decided not to pay a licensing fee to use the word Georgia Third Vineyard. Um,
Right.
but and then with regards to Oak Knoll, it's I'm going to just go all the way south really quick and say, with the exception of Trefethen, who's been out in Oak Knoll for quite some time, I wasn't really familiar with the wines of Oak Knoll. So we approached this a little bit differently in that we saw what was on the existing vineyard. Vineyard had been planted in '86, and there was a lot of Merlot and Cabernet Franc, and we did decide to embrace that, embrace the old vines that we have on the property, rather than just sort of shoehorning Cabernet in Oak Knoll, in the flats where we are, in the sort of the center area of the valley. Now, pushing out towards the benches, you have Red Hen Vineyard, which is I'm just going to mention again the collaboration aspect of this, because Oak Knoll, our introduction to Oak Knoll Cabernet was through Barton Daphne Arajo when they purchased the Red Hen Vineyard. And our winemaker, Steve Mathiasen, had been farming that vineyard for quite some time. And of course, our other winemaker, Diana Snowden Sess, had worked harvests at Isley Vineyard for the Arajo family. So to me, that sort of collaboration is very exciting and thrilling. And that we were making Cabernet, serious Cabernet in Oak Knoll, which of course Oak Knoll is not necessarily known for Cabernet, but this vineyard, it sort of is on a slope into the Mayacamas Mountains, was the appropriate vineyard, in my opinion, for Cabernet. So that's the Red Hen Vineyard. And then we make wine in Oakville. It's in Barton Daphne's property, the Rancho Pequeño Vineyard in Oakville. But to me, Oakville is sort of Mondavi country, or like the McDonald family and what they do with Tocolon. They just make great wines, and so we were very inspired by the wines they produced, and the wines we had from Oakville. Oakville is sort of like our is our star AVA, right? I mean, Napa Valley, I think, and I don't have AVA envy here, but like, let's just say Oakville is the star of Napa Valley. It really is. I mean, think about the great wines that came from Oakville.
Including pre-prohibition.
Oakville, Rancho. Let's see.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, and then Atlas Peak. Just quickly here, because I know I'm just going on here. Atlas Peak. It's sort of in my mind, Atlas Peak is it's sort of like Mars. It's very rugged terrain, and then the Mount Veeder Vineyard we also have a vineyard in. It's on the oceanic side of the mountain range in the valley, and it's obviously a lot more green. You get these old redwoods, and so I see that vineyard is a lot more sort of refined, elegant, and nuanced, and a little herbaceous in the right pocket. So that's Napa Valley. A quick tour of Napa Valley for you.
I love that. And I think it's a great segue to talking about the concept of taking those different elements that Cabernet can bring when you get, sometimes you get the hedonism and opulence of an Oakville, and you get the sort of more filigreed, lacy expression of an Oak Knoll district, and then, kind of the dust and pencil lead of Rutherford, and then the green elements of and herbaceous and cedar and sort of sappy herbs of mountain. Joe, having grown up here and grown up basically between two barrels filled with Cabernet Sauvignon your whole entire life, you were probably born right where you're sitting or somewhere similar to that. You've tasted and experienced all of these AVAs, and just with your one reserve Cabernet alone, which we're going to taste in a few minutes, you have at least 5 or 6 in there. What's the concept of Quilt? And what did your upbringing here? At what point did you say that's the right way to do it for me, for Joe?
Well, the concept of the Napa Valley Quilt is taking the patchwork of Napa Valley and putting it together to create this cohesive cult style Cabernet. And consistency is a key factor. And if there's one flaw with vineyard designation, and for anybody out there that doesn't know, I started with vineyard designated Pinot Noirs, still doing them with the Belglas label. So I'm a huge fan of that. But Pinot Noir is a whole different ballgame. It's very expressive about the site, more so than any other variety. When working with my dad in Cabernet over at Caymus, I learned that working with a number of different appellations can benefit the end wine. So you get those kind of stark and tannic and angular characters from the hillsides like Atlas Peak. Coombsville has some minerality. Not every year is it great, but in great years, it is absolutely amazing. And so it adds that element of kind of elegance to the wine. As you move up the valley, Oak Knoll, getting to Oakville, Rutherford, St. Helena, Calistoga, gets progressively warmer, and you get riper, sappier, just richer and more mouth-filling characters. So by taking these elements and components and blending them together, we're able to create this kind of full Napa Valley style, and that was what the intention was here. And so I feel that as there's great camaraderie here in the valley, there is also some competition. You against each other. We're really competing to help somebody that's out to dinner or just enjoying a night in elevate that experience. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's Catherine or Kashi that has their wine on the table. As long as people are out there enjoying a great wine every night, then we can all celebrate in that camaraderie. So I wouldn't call us competitors, although people oftentimes think that we are. But there are many different ways to skin a cat. What I love about the wine industry, and I can't think of any other product out there, there's over 14,000 wines on the shelf at any given time in North America. So if you consider that, that's a huge array of opportunity for consumers out there to be able to experiment. You find a vein that you like and you fall in love with it and you start to explore around it, maybe the Rioja, and that may lead you into Italian wines eventually, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the beauty of wine, is not just elevating that everyday experience, but also just the adventure of it, whether it's physically adventurous in nature, like coming to Napa Valley, which I really hope you all do take an opportunity to do so if you haven't, or going across the pond and seeing what's going on in Europe. I think that even just opening a bottle can take you back to that time and that place, and that is one of the most amazing things about wine, is it can capture that moment. So in my upbringing, I learned a lot from my father, Chuck Wagner, and he co-founded Caymus with my grandparents. And in the early days, they were trying to emulate Bordeaux. That was the benchmark. That's what they knew. So they do comparative tastings against Bordeaux. And over the next decade, they started in '72. They realized that Napa Valley had not just a terroir all of its own, but a number of terroirs all their own. And they began to explore that. And Caymus became a Cabernet house, so to speak. And they started to work with other vineyards in different areas and so on and so forth. And I think helped in the early days create what is known as the Napa Valley style now. And we've even seen international Cabernet region start to migrate more towards a slightly richer style. And I think that it's one that is very reflective of, not just our soil, but also our climate. And as our climate is changing, I know Kashi and Oak Knoll, Oak Knoll is a great sort of center point to Napa Valley. Many people didn't think of Oak Knoll as a Cabernet Sauvignon location. It was always thought to be more of a Merlot location. But in the last 3 vintages, including this one in 2020, some of the best wines that we've produced from all of Napa Valley are coming right out of Oak Knoll, even in the valley floor. So we're very impressed with that area. I couldn't tell you if it was based in climate change or just that we're having some successively amazing vintages for that specific region. But it is amazing to see the changes that occur throughout the years and to see what you can do with those, especially when it comes to being able to use them as a piece of a blend in a wine like the Quilt.
Well, we have, I love that. And we're going to touch on vintage. We're going to touch on some of the components of terroir because I think that all of us see it here. And until you come here and maybe not just drive Highway 29, but really get around, then you see the diversity of terroir that we have. But I did want to mention, by the way, that one of the vintners had to wear the Central Casting farm guy shirt, and we voted that it would be Joe. So so we had to have one person, and I'm telling you, if he showed us his footwear, it would probably be some kind of, funky boot, which all of us have a pair of. But anyway, so thank you for that, Joe. Good job. But you so you hit on something that I think is, I just want to make a brief reference to terroir because what people don't realize, and if you don't get the opportunity to taste a diversity of Cabernet sources side by side frequently within the Napa Valley, within our different AVAs, you don't necessarily get to see this. And it especially shows with age. And so I encourage you, if you have the space and the patience and self-discipline, put some of these wines down. They have the structure that they need to age. But our terroir, we're going to look at some slides here in a second that really show the diversity of their diversities of elevations, their diversities of exposure aspect. And I think people also don't necessarily know, but we have maybe 90% of the Globe's soil series here in Napa Valley, all in one place that is, 4%, I think, of the state's wine production, but of course, a giant of importance in the world of wine. And so I think we're gonna talk about that a little bit now. But I also want to talk about it in reference to climate, because you mentioned that, Joe, and I think everyone is really focused on that. And this is where I get to reference one of my favorite phrases that comes from the great one, Wayne Gretzky, in explaining how he was the great one. He said he always skated to where the puck was going, and rather than where it was. And I like that because I think our great vintners are looking at right now what we have that's unique and special about Napa Valley terroir and what we need to do to preserve it in terms of structure and balance in the wines as climate change shows itself in our various aspects of viticulture. So Catherine, I want to ask you what things your teams are doing with Vineyard to respond to climate change.
Yeah. Andrea, let me say first something. I just love Joe's comment about how they would taste against French wines, because it brought back so many memories of my father as well, who came into as a grower, began in the 70s. But I think what's happened in our industry, and us in our industry, those of us in Napa over the years, we have developed this self-confidence. We really know who we are. And so we understand the terroir that our wines come from. We don't try to be French. I think there was a time that that was what was cool. And I think it was reflected in some of our wines that were over oaked. And that we thought oak was fancy and that was French and whatever. But anyway, we know who we are now. And I think it really, it shows. And part of that, I think, is reflected in our responsiveness to the earth. I think good farmers have always been very aware of the fact that we're only caretakers for the land for as long as we have it under our control. But I think in these days we're especially concerned about what we do. So I think water is a big part of being responsible. And so there are some wonderful tools now that were not available in my dad's day, for example. I mean, that you can use. You can use neutron probing to test the water content in the soils. There's all these sorts of very fancy ways that you can determine very, very quickly the degree to which a plant is stressed. And I think so you want to know what are the water needs, and you don't want to give too much. You don't want to give too much because it's going to affect the quality of the grape, but you also don't want to give too much because it's not responsible. So we do drip farming. We don't use much water. We sort of monitor all of that as much as we can. We use biofuel in the vineyards. I mean, just a variety of things that we all try to do, I think. And I'll just speak for myself right now because I know this story the best. But to try to be the most responsible we can be to produce the very best wines. And by the way, luckily, those things are really consistent. I mean, when you spend more time in the vineyard making sure that your grapes are the best they can be, that gets reflected in the wine that those grapes produce. So
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting because I've seen it now, and I've heard. I'm so glad that you said that we're not. Several of you said we're not trying to be French. One of our other great vintners in Oakville Vintners said, you know, we don't want to make great Bordeaux in Napa Valley. We want to make great Cabernet in Napa Valley, or great Napa Valley Cabernet. And I think that that's very well said. And Kashi, you mentioned that, you know, standing on the shoulders of some of the pioneers is a huge responsibility to preserve what they started, but also to refine it and bring it to the next level. And I've seen with one of your winemakers, you mentioned Steve Mathiasen, really. And like Catherine's teams, and I'm sure Joe's vineyards, like, because I've looked at what your sourcing is, everyone is talking about what they're calling precision farming. So it's not one size fits all, even down to the vine, right? So if you can, I've seen it in Steve's own vineyards. If you can talk a little bit about what does that actually mean?
So in fact, to back up just a little bit, I think, so our wine is, I think one would call like the moniker that's been given us is like old school Napa Valley wines. And we make wines that are a little bit more on the old world side. And how we accomplish that is through a series of farming techniques, which Steve Mathiasen has really become famous for. I think, you know, cover crop is very important to Steve. The canopy is very important to Steve. Water, Catherine had mentioned water. We try not to use it at all unless, you know, the vine is really stressed. We tend to do just one deep irrigation for 24 hours during the summertime, but really try to follow the sort of the John Williams book of dry farming as much as we can. We're not dogmatic at Ashes and Diamonds. Like, we make natural wines, some that don't have SO2, but sometimes SO2 is warranted. But we sort of try to, I call us more like reductive farming. We're just trying to not use our hands as much as possible. We really want to create a natural experience that starts in the vineyard with organic farming and then comes all the way to the glass. In terms of climate change, you know, there's obviously not much we can do. I think it would be a little silly for me to sit here and say we have an answer. I think we learn every year about climate change right now. In 2017, I remember, you know, we had those incredible heat spikes, and you know, we ended up picking the grapes just I think on one of those days where the temperatures got up over 100 degrees, and the Brix had shot up. When we brought the grapes back to the winery, then the Brix went backwards. So how's that for keeping you on your toes? And remarkably, it still produced good wine. And so the point I'm kind of making is I think we as man have very little control as to what's happening with climate change. Sure, there's a lot of discussion about micro misters. There's a lot of discussion about higher trellising. In my mind, there hasn't been sort of like a silver bullet that I've seen. And of course, I'm new to this industry. I was by 2014 during the drought here. I was at Capitol Records, so I'm incredibly new. I do have a background as a consumer through the wines that my dad would share with me, but still 6 years in at this point, I'm still observing, and I've come into this industry at a very unique time. The last 3 years, obviously, we've had our challenges with the fires. What I will say is that every bottle of Napa Valley wine that you have, and especially from these producers that are here today, and you taste that glass of wine, and I assure you, you're going to like that glass of wine. It's a miracle in a glass. I think in Burgundy and Bordeaux, they don't always have, not every vintage is a good vintage. In Napa, I feel like every vintage, we've been blessed with a lot of great vintages. And I think with Napa, and I don't mean to shoot ourselves in the foot here, but every year is going to have its series of challenges because of climate change, and some vintages will be better than other vintages. Sorry to give the straight dope here, but
straight dope is good. One of the things that I think people have seen on the screen here is that, and I'm going to just touch on it because then I want to get to the 2020 vintage because Joe talked about it. And I know people want to get kind of an update of where we are, but I just want to mention that in terms of sustainability, and it is not simply a reaction to climate change, but it has an impact on that. You're seeing Napa Green Certified, which is a sustainability commitment and certification program that really is a full circle program. When we talk about sustainability, and you saw a picture with solar panels, et cetera, it isn't just about farming in the vineyard. It's hugely connected to farming, whether that's judicious water use, whether that is minimal synthetic inputs. But it's a bigger picture thing that very much connects to how we feel about our community and each other. And that includes taking care of the people who farm the grapes and the people who work in the front of the house and the back of the house and everywhere in between. So, and it really makes a big difference. And I'll never forget when I came here and my little boy started playing Little League, and the most famous vineyard manager in probably this country, if not one of the most famous in the world, was using his equipment to maintain the Little League ball field. And it was right across from one of his famously farmed vineyards. And I thought, oh, I get it now. Your kids are your dogs and you are running through this is your yard. And we're taking care of each other and our community in those ways. And so I think it's everything from carbon footprint reduction to really responsible use and minimal invasiveness with anything to do with chemicals, judicious use of water, and looking at it as a whole full circle 360 thing. So it's something that I'm really, really proud of, and I see it all day, every day living here, what the lengths that all of these vintners go to be committed to sustainability while creating this extraordinary luxury product in a sustainably, from an economic perspective, way, because at the end of the day, it has to be something that can be a going concern. So I just wanted to hit on that. And now I want to get to the 2020 vintage because, Joe, you mentioned that you had brought in some extraordinary fruit from Oak Knoll District of Napa Valley, obviously prior to any fire exposure. So first of all, I know that a lot of wineries already have quite a bit of extraordinary wine in-house, in tank, and good to go. And I know, Kashi, you had offered some of your capacity in your winery to a neighbor up the hill who had lost some of their facilities to damage. It's a real community spirit around here. So, Joe, if you could just talk about the quality of the 2020 vintage so people know there is something to look forward to, even though it'll be smaller quantities. And then talk about, how you see this community banding together to be able to get through a challenging time, but we're resilient. That's what farming is, right?
Whether it's protecting your neighbor's land or your must pump goes down in the winery, there have been countless times when the community is, at large, ready to help at any given moment. So we have that going for us. It's a great community here in Napa. Even if you don't know somebody very personally, they're always willing to help. But in regards to this vintage, we did bring in the majority of our Cabernet from the northern part of Napa Valley. So let's call that from Rutherford up through Calistoga. Prior to the second bout of fires that we had, everything post this second fires was brought in from South Valley. But what we did was brought in small bucket ferments, what we call micro ferments, and we would run those ferments and then analyze them, do a sensory analysis, and see where they landed. And overall, we didn't see all that much of a problem. Now, Cabernet is a very different type of grape, whereas, say, Pinot Noir really expresses this, what we call smoke taint, these elements that would be smoky or ashy. They can be kind of burnt plastic at times. We didn't have a lot of exposure to smoke here in Napa Valley in the early part of the season, and that is when it is most detrimental to the crop. So it became more of an environmental factor with ash on the vines or ash on the grapes that we were more conscious or concerned about. So we'd blow those off with just more or less a spray rig blowing air. So we would be able to mitigate that issue. So the wines that we've seen so far, 2 of our ferments are complete out of Oak Knoll, as well as Coombsville, and then we still have a few more going through from Oak Knoll up into Atlas Peak. And I think the most impacted areas were the areas that were very close to the fires, that had direct impact, where fire and smoke was literally just streaming through the vineyard, and you had everything from a heat factor there, also to a very heavy direct exposure to smoke. And we did see some of those lots that we did not bring in. But I think when it comes to quality, you're looking at it. Fortunately, we have crop insurance. So if we're looking at it saying that this would be a flawed wine, we can leave it on the vine and feel assured that we're going to maintain the integrity of the wine we're going to bottle, but also not feel the economic impact of the fires. When it comes to where we're at with the fires, it was a crazy week. We had 2 properties burn in the second fire, so we lost about 700 acres and 8 structures. But I'll tell you that a lot of friends in the wine business, they came out with tanks in their truck and gas-powered water pumps, and we were doing everything we can to save all the structures that we did. So fortunately, we did that, and it's reciprocal. So as soon as we were done with those properties, we'd move on to another person's property and try to protect that. There was great support here from CAL FIRE, from around the nation for that matter, but also a huge local impact that people got together and really did everything they could to help. And then when it came to the production side, as you were saying about Kashi, same thing. If there are people that are looking for a home for their grapes, if they weren't able to pick or they were rejected, we were able to bring some of those in and help out where there is space available. And so that's been, it was just like 2020 is in general, it's kind of a wake up and pivot sort of mentality. And so we've been very agile, and I've learned to be more agile this year than ever. So, but along with that, I think comes just growing the greatness of the community. So very fortunate to have what we have. We didn't lose any lives at all in these fires, which is absolutely amazing in the last bout of fires. So fortunate for that. But I think that the 2020 vintage overall, it's looking very good. It was a light crop. It's relatively early. The wines that we've seen are more on the opulent side, very, very round, luscious, and rich. And I'd attribute that partly to the relatively warm summer we had with quite a few heat spikes, but also with a light crop. So you get tons of concentration in those berries and therefore in the resulting wine.
Beautiful. I think well said. Incredible heroics. And I'll just say to everybody, I live right across the street from where the glass fire started, and it's still very beautiful here. And yes, there is some damage, but most of Napa Valley it looks exactly the way you're remembering it, and will be completely exactly what you expect and hope to see when you come again. So I think sometimes we see stuff on TV and it's like way off base. It's still very beautiful here and a very warm, welcoming place. And Joe, like you said, we are all just so connected and delighted to be part of a community that feels that way and that works that way, because it's the real deal. Now you talked about opulence. I want to jump into the glass here because I know what's in my glass is the quilt, Napa Valley Quilt Reserve. And this is, to me, is opulence in a glass. Did you learn something from your dad, or does he have something to learn from you?
You know what I learned from my dad was probably the most important thing to learn, and that was just always try new things, always experiment, never give up. He never forced me into this industry, but once I got into other industries, I realized how much of an amazing industry this was. You have agricultural components, you have artistic and scientific components, industrial elements to it. So if you have ADD, it's a great business to be in. But what he taught me was always, consider that you've never done enough and always try to up the bar. It's a very progressive industry. It's constantly changing. And if we think that, sitting and resting on our laurels is what's going to continue to drive the wine industry to the future, I think we're sadly wrong. I think that there's still a ton to learn. We learn something new every year, whether it's something tiny or something massive. And one thing I want to say about Napa Valley that I've seen here is that we have an amazing community, and that community is made up of all walks of life, from the wealthiest people in the world down to your first generation immigrants, and everybody trying to live the American dream. But what that has brought to Napa Valley is not just amazing wines and beauty, but I think it's brought the most competitive winemaking landscape in the world. You have a number of people that are going for that 100-point wine. They're looking to be that number one wine in America, and they have the ability to do that from a financial perspective. And so they're bringing on the best vineyard managers, the best winemaking talent, and the most amazing facilities. And what that does as a community is keeps everybody honest and elevating their game every year. And you need to continue to do that. Otherwise, you start to fall short. And so I think that it is the fastest, most progressive wine region in the world for those reasons. And I think being a part of it, being right in the middle of it, is a great place to be. And it's not just a pleasure to be alongside all of the peers here, but I think it's also just an absolute opportunity to continue to be driven, if not by yourself, then by what you're seeing on the outside.
Totally true. I think that what you're saying about community is amazing. And I think many people know this, but it still blows my mind, even though I see it just palpably, the Napa Valley Vintners, and the incredible community giving that makes it possible for, as you said, the first generation immigrant family to come here and have an extraordinary quality of life and opportunity. And it's all focused on community health and children's education. That includes brain health, and that also includes disaster relief. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, thanks to all these people on the panel and peers throughout the valley that, like you say, keep each other on our toes in terms of working hard to get better and better and better, while always working hard to take care of all of us as a family. I want to know, well, I bet that your dad didn't tell you the very best pairing for your Cabernet, which I taught him, so I'm going to tell you what it is. Did he tell you the very best pairing for Cabernet from Andrea? No? Okay. So 90% cacao, dark chocolate. And I told him that. I ran into him in the supermarket like 8 years ago, gave him that bar of chocolate, and I saw him 2 weeks later, and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." And my doctor gave me the thumbs up. All right, so lots of antioxidants. So now you have your homework assignment. Let's jump into the glass with
90%.
Tashi. 90%. And because your style, the style of this wine is so elegant. It's not part of the vintage's release, but it is available in Ontario through your agent there, correct? And so I
Why
wanted
you
to
got to
make
keep
sure.
it down, Toronto?
So this is for someone you mentioned European style or old school style. I really want to emphasize the diamonds part of this. It's so elegant, and but to me it's like a solitaire. It's not a huge brooch. It is gorgeous.
You can't have diamonds without ashes. But so you nailed it there. So again, the sort of old school Napa wines that were more French in style, or the wines that you've had from more modern interpretation of that, the wines you've had from Mathiasen, or even from Frog's Leap, Mayacamas Heights. There's a lot of producers in Napa Valley that make a sort of a more old school style of Napa wine, and that's what we do. A little bit different than some of the rest, but for me, anyways, it sort of started and ended with the vineyard. So Oak Knoll Vineyard, this vineyard in Oak Knoll, the Red Hen Vineyard. When Bart and Daphne took it over, started farming it biodynamically. That it was Cabernet in the south side of Napa, especially with the warmer climate. The planets are all sort of aligned for me on this sort of great collaboration between all these great minds and this great vineyard. And so, in the spirit of those old school Napa wines, which if you ever take a bottle of an old BV wine, I got one right with me. So check this out. I love how it says.
Why aren't we with you wherever you are?
Produced entirely from Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, and that's way back in the day, they used to make 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, and so in that spirit, and just in terms of how different each block of this vineyard was, we did 100% Napa Valley Cabernet, and so you get a real true expression of Cabernet from this vineyard. It's of course single vineyard wine. We produce several single vineyard wines, and it just sort of it screamed old school Napa. It screamed like like these sort of wines, or actually even I've been doing a lot of drinking clearly, or like old Charles Krug. These are the wines that I love. These are the wines that my dad shared with me, and they have 13% alcohol. And that's our style. That's our sort of credo here at Ashes and Diamonds. But again, that's the beauty of Napa Valley, is just how diverse it is. Is that this is not all I drink. I also enjoy Hall. I enjoy Quilt and Joe's wines. I think there's just the beauty of Napa Valley is also. It's diversity. There's just, especially in this current climate, there's just so many different producers procuring the voice of so many different vineyards. It's an exciting time as well in Napa Valley.
100%. I think we're seeing more diversity than ever, because I'm going to say that with everybody on this panel, Catherine and Joe, I think both of these wines that you're tasting are 100% Cabernet as well, right?
Yes.
The Quilt Reserve is 100% Cabernet.
Look at that. Touché.
Actually, mine has a little Merlot. One of them has
A little bit
1%
Merlot.
and the other 5%.
Okay. All right. So take me into the glass. I've got the Catherine Hall in my glass. I don't know what you have in yours, but take me into the
I
glass.
actually do too.
Okay, so we were talking about diamonds and we were talking about opulence, and here I'm at velvet. How about you?
Oh yeah, velvet and lush and opulent. So this so have two wonderful Cabernets. I am so proud that we're in the LCBO, and that our Napa Valley Cab is there. And that's the one Cabernet we make. I think, my goodness, I was trying to count it quickly while we've been going on, but it's something under 30, but we make a whole lot of Cabernets. But there is one Cabernet that we make that is sourced from 13 of the different appellations, and that's the Napa Valley Cab. So that's really our effort to express a vintage each year. But
Nice.
the Catherine Hall, comes from my backyard, hence the name. Well, maybe I would have called it that way anyway, I don't know. But anyway, it comes from my backyard. So it's the core of this fruit is in Sacochet, which is within the Rutherford appellation. But Cash, you were talking about the Rutherford appellation earlier. I don't think it really has a lot of the Rutherford qualities to it. What we think of as the dustiness that comes from Rutherford, but it's a tufa soil. It's 750 feet in elevation, and then we'll blend in some other mountain fruit to go along with it. But the goal of this wine of the Catherine Hall each year is to create this wine that is consistently elegant and very rich with lots of fruit. I'll always get lots of blackberry, but also earthiness in it, and opulent. Hopefully, all of those words add up to equal delicious. That's the goal.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the technical term that we use is yum.
Yeah.
So, but this, I would say that with the combination of what's the name of your? Do you remember the name of your agent in Ontario? I think we'll be able to communicate that out.
Kidding. His name is Joel at ABV, actually.
Okay, all right.
He's
so
he's
because
a scoundrel. You got to watch out for that guy.
Okay, watch out for him, but just make sure you get the wine, because if you get these three wines and taste them side by side, you will have a perfect experience of the diversity of style of Napa Valley Cabernets, all of them worthy and so interesting, like our esteemed panelists here. I want to just make a mention of a couple of things about actually, I want to answer one question, and then I'll close with a couple of last announcements here. But we had a question from one viewer wondering if there are any Napa wineries using the Appassimento style of winemaking. And if I can just frame that, I would describe that as fermenting the wine on top of fermenting raisinated grapes, which is a classic Italian especially Northern Italian way of making wine using raisinated fruit. I don't believe that many Napa vintners think of it as that style, but there are some winemakers that do like to harvest a portion of slightly more dried, slightly raisinated fruit. I'm wondering if any of you guys do that, or if you're aware of anybody else to answer the question. No raisination. How about you?
Quick question.
No.
Andrea, just quick question. We don't raisin the grapes, but we do pick. We do our Merlots in two picks, and then we save a portion of the grape juice, freeze it, and then reintroduce it in the bottle so it can undergo secondary fermentation. We do sort of like a light frizzante Merlot in the Italian sort of style, like Mascarelli does the Fresa, like that style of wine. Is that what they're referring to? Or
I don't think so. Okay. Usually that Appassimento gives you that sort of, kind of richer, almost getting in the vein of Amarone style. Joe, how about you guys? Any use of that?
No, then no.
We've experimented with it. I've always loved Amarone. I love the philosophy there, but typically we don't have a problem with ripeness here in Napa. Not saying that they have a problem with ripeness in Amarone, but it's been more stemmed from the tradition of what they do, where they're picking, drying, and then reintroducing afterwards. And they make voluptuous, beautiful wines. And honestly, the times we've done it, you're looking at 17, 18% alcohol wines. They're just insane.
Right.
They're going to get you in trouble. So I would probably just stay away from them. But we may be doing some of these experiments in the future that we'll be doing at Quilt and Company in downtown Napa. We'll be offering those as 50 to 100 case lots just for the tasting room, because they are always fun to see where they come out. But also we look at it from the standpoint of, is this achievable on any larger of a scale than what we're doing? And the infrastructure you have to do to create a Pasamento style is pretty wild. So I'm going to guess that was a guy named Robert Spano in Canada that asked that question.
That might be. Oh, that's so funny. I bet you're right. Well, so a couple of closing messages here. First of all, though, I want to say that this has been an amazing experience, and the only thing wrong with it is that we're not in the same room. But hopefully this time next year we'll all be up in Ontario and tasting these wines in person as a way of kicking off the Vintages release and special collection offering. It is. The focus is Cabernet. There are a few other wine styles in there that are all worthy in the offering, but it's really referring to Napa Valley Cabernet New World masterpieces. And it's the truth. And it's not just because I live here. It's really, really something that I'm so proud to be a part of this region because of the people, but then the wines, they bring it, right? Let's put it that way. So I just want to quickly say the collection includes high scoring offerings from a lot of top Napa producers. You have Catherine Hall and Hall Wines, of course. You have Napa Valley Quilt, as well as you'll think of Clos-de-Val, More Old School, Paulmeyer, Chateau Montelena. You got the drill. It's good. You're going to have to do your homework and jump on it quick, because between now and tomorrow at 7 p.m. is your early exclusive shopping opportunity before the offering goes broad. And then, as you know, all of the wines are limited. And so it's now or never. And please do sign up for the Vintage's latest newsletter. It's just an easy way to stay on top of the opportunity for events like this and other special releases, so that when these wines are available for the little amount of time that they are, you can make them a part of your cellar and your life. Because as Joe said, it's part of enhancing lives. And we really, really culturally are so connected to the notion of breaking bread and sharing wine together, and having that be the bridge between all of us. And I think we all really, really appreciate the opportunity for that. And now more than ever. So please make sure that when you can travel comfortably again, we here in Napa Valley are at the top of your list. You'll be so studied up because you'll have tasted all these wines from the Vintages release and from Ashes and Diamonds before you get here. And then you'll be able to visit those 3 facilities on your visit, and you'll have seen it all. And you'll get the red carpet rolled out for you, because that's what we do. As I say to my friends, we love to love on our visitors, and we will take care of you in spades. Our famous chef, Thomas Keller, said to me once that hospitality is taking care of people even when they're not paying you for it. So if you show up and taste some wine and don't buy anything, you're still going to be made to feel great. But anyway, we really want to see you here soon. You'll see it's as beautiful as ever, and you'll be able to thank these people in person. So, Catherine, any last couple words? I know we're running over, so I wanted to kind of close it off, but let you guys say another last word or two.
I'd love to say, do come see us. Our tasting rooms are open. We are seeing people as we speak now. It's a little earlier in California right now. The air is blue, and it's as beautiful as ever in Napa. So come see us. We'd love to have you come. And cheers. And thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you to the LCBO, and thank you to everybody for today.
Absolutely.
I'll
Kashi?
say, where else are you going to go? Are you going to go see a movie? Are you going to go to a ball game? Come on, you got nothing else to do. Come to Napa Valley. We're open, and we make great wine. And you could come and hang out, play some music, enjoy the landscape, have a good time here. There's nothing better to do right now. It's COVID era.
Well said. Joe?
Well, I would like to thank you all for your support and your interest in Napa Valley wines. It's greatly appreciated. Of course, we'd love to have you out here as well. But we also love coming to Canada, one of my favorite places to go. So thank you, and I hope you guys all enjoy more and more Napa Cab as time goes on. There's a reason for it being as fantastic and well known as it is. So cheers and thank you.
Thank you to all of you, to the LCBO, Napa Valley Vintners that keep us all glued together, and especially Catherine, Kashi, Joe. Just makes me so happy to be your neighbor. Thank you for spending this time and sharing your time with us. Cheers.